Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sure, the lights are quite bright in my eyes. Can you see me if I stand here? I think this will work better for me with the lights. Okay, waste as a resource. What are the opportunities in Africa? Now, I think before I start, I just want to mention that when we compiled the Africa Waste Management Outlook report last year, we discovered that data is a problem. We don't know much about waste, specifically industrial waste streams in Africa. The data that is available is mostly for municipal solid waste. So when we want to consider opportunities for industrial symbiosis in Africa, it becomes tricky if you don't have data. So let's see what we have and try and make do with what is available. So just a quick overview of my presentation, a quick introduction, the waste hierarchy versus the circular economy. As Tabo just mentioned, our law still talks about the waste hierarchy, and that is what we have to implement. But internationally, the circular economy is now featuring more and more, and we are also talking more and more about it here in South Africa. Then just what are some of the opportunities for Africa and some conclusions and recommendations. So the stats. How much waste do we generate in Africa? The latest available information is for 2012, and it estimated about 125 million tons of municipal solid waste generated in Africa. Now, that may not seem to be a lot if you consider that it's a big continent with a lot of people, but as I said, because we struggle with data, this is basically municipal solid waste and not all the waste streams. So just keep that in mind. That comes down to 0.65 kilogram per person per day of municipal solid waste, and this is projected to increase to 0.85 kilograms per person per day in 2025. Now, that does not sound like a big increase, but keeping in mind, we are also seeing an increase in the number of people. So, the increase in waste in Africa is going to be significant to such an extent that it's stated that internationally, all the efforts that the rest of the world are doing to try and reduce waste is going to be totally overshadowed by what's happening in Africa. Africa is the biggest continent with the greatest growth potential, and therefore we will see a lot of growth in waste as well. Sadly, just before I move on, it is anticipated that we will see about a 30% growth in waste from 2012 till 2025. So that is quite a significant increase. Now, the sad part is only about 55% of all the waste, municipal waste generated in Africa is actually collected. What happens to the rest? Yes, you guess right. It's illegally dumped or disposed of on dump sites or burned. So it's resources that disappears or is in places where it shouldn't be, impacting negatively on the environment. The average collection rate in Africa is only 40%. But that sounds not too bad, but it ranges between 25% in some of the poorer countries like Lesotho, up to 70%. And sadly, the 70% is not in South Africa, but in Egypt. So we are on the forerun, but we are not the best in Africa when it comes to collections. As I said, open dumping still is the predominant waste management method used in Africa, and it's estimated that 19 of the world's biggest dump sites are in Africa. And this is where they are. And please take note, 3 of them is down here in South Africa. And when you talk about the biggest dump sites, it's not to say in size only. It is because they don't have proper liners, they don't have leachate or gas management systems, they don't have any flooding management systems, and the operations are not sound. And then I must also say, these 3 is the 3 that made it into the report, but it does not mean that all our landfills in South Africa is actually compliant to the latest requirements. Thank you. I've just been told to come and stand here in the light, so I will do, excuse me if I if my eyes is not looking very well. Okay, then if we continue, we've already stated that we're going to see a great increase in waste generation, but this is not going to stabilize before the next century. And therefore, the reasons for this is urbanization, increase in socioeconomic status, as well as higher disposable income. We are seeing economic growth, and therefore more waste is going to be generated. Municipalities are generally the people responsible for providing the waste management services, but the private sector are actually better suited to do it. They can do it a lot more effectively and at a lower cost than municipalities. So why don't we have more private sector involvement in waste collection? It's simple. The private sector can only provide services when they've got paying clients. And we know in South Africa we've got a lot of policies around free basic services to indigent households. There's also one for waste. So therefore we must find a way of cross-subsidizing waste management services, and the industry is not going to buy into providing services if they don't get payment for providing that service. And then waste composition is also going to change over time, and this is quite significant changes that we will see. If you just look at this graph, you will see low-income countries right here at the top. We see about 64% organic waste, with the rest being other waste streams. The 5 is paper, this is plastic, that is glass, and up there is metal. And when you look at low middle income, then already it's a change to 59% organics. If you look down here, middle income, then it's 54%, even less. And if you look at high income countries, then it's even less, 28% organic. Now this does not mean that the other waste streams disappear. It simply means that because organic waste is so heavy, that by weight the portion is so much bigger. And the change shows us also that with increased income we buy more stuff, and because we buy more food and all the rest, there's more packaging material associated, and therefore you see the increase in packaging more noticeably. But that does also not mean that organic waste is not increasing, it just increases at a slower rate than the rest. But if we then look at the waste composition in sub-Saharan Africa as opposed to the rest of the world, our organic waste here in sub-Saharan Africa sit at 57% and the rest of the world at 46%. We are using less paper as compared to the 70% in global. Plastics are more or less on par, 13% here, 10% there. Glass is more or less the same, metal is more or less the same, and the other waste streams are more significant in global than in Africa, and included in the other is also our electronic waste. So you can see there that even though municipal waste does show some changes between different areas, the overall composition is not really that much different. It's the same types of materials that we find in the waste. Now, if we look at waste management, we've already discussed the hierarchy, and I'm not going to give you a lot of detail on the hierarchy. I think Tabu did more than enough on that. But what is important to note is that the waste hierarchy provides us a set of priorities for efficient use of resources. And therefore, it's quite easy to interpret, and it provides clarity on priority actions and behaviors for everybody, even people in the household, what we can and cannot do. When we talk about the circular economy, on the other hand, it is a lot more aspirational. It's a closed-loop approach that we are looking for, but it also requires fundamental changes in business operations. If you all of a sudden don't want leakage anymore to a waste dump site, and you want to keep the material in the cycle, you have to rethink your processes if you are an industry. And then also, you need to think about collaboration between private and the public sector, because not everything can be potentially recycled within your own process, and this is then also where industrial symbiosis becomes an option. So there's just a different picture of the hierarchy. For the hierarchy, our first priority is to reduce, and our last priority is landfill. We currently sit mostly down here, and we want to move up the hierarchy. And even though recycling is now the focus, everybody's on this bandwagon, it is still better to prevent waste if at all possible. And when you start talking about prevention, then you're not talking about circular economy so much, you are talking about reducing whatever can be reduced, so that we don't have to unnecessarily use resources that will be wasted anymore. You've probably seen this picture quite a number of times already around the circular economy, which basically just means that we want to keep the materials in the cycle for as long as possible so that we can extract the maximum value. And the two sides, this side is just the renewables, so more the organic stuff, and on that side we see more the finite materials. This is your metals and your plastics and things like that. And we must try and keep all of this in the cycle for as long as possible if we want to talk about a circular economy. And some people say, but waste to energy currently is high on the agenda. There's a lot of opportunities to generate electricity, especially if you look at our Eskom not being able to provide enough electricity always. I just want to caution you that if we start talking about incineration with energy recovery, we are burning material, meaning it's gone. You extract the value once and it's gone. So only material that cannot be recycled should be considered for incineration with energy recovery. So then what are the opportunities? There's lots of opportunities to move the waste up the hierarchy. To reduce social and environmental impacts of waste, it will reduce financial, social, and environmental cost of collection and disposal. Recycling and energy recovery contribute to economic growth through job creation, enterprise development, and innovation. It allows for recovery of materials and energy in support of the circular economy. It also allows recovery of materials not only in the circular economy, but also in upcycling and downcycling, but we want to try and upcycle more. Downcycling meaning that you're actually in a cycle of diminishing resources so that you don't get quite the value, and we want to actually extract the best value possible. And we've got nice examples here in South Africa where we already have, for instance, bottle-to-bottle recycling, where the water bottles that you buy can be recycled back into a water bottle. So that is a perfect example of true circular economy. And then we want to displace the use of virgin materials and therefore reduce financial, social, and environmental costs associated with virgin material extraction. So implementing the circular economy, it will preserve and enhance our natural capital. We're not going to use as much virgin resources. We are going to optimize resource yields and foster system effectiveness. But before we can truly move into a circular economy, we first have to resolve the challenges around waste management. And we've spoken about municipal waste being poorly managed. I can guarantee you that industrial waste in Africa is also not managed optimally. And that is where a lot of the struggles come with implementing industrial symbiosis as well. So we need to improve waste collection and disposal systems. We need services to be expanded to address all the backlogs across the continent, and then we must find ways of bridging the gaps between the waste services and the waste value chain. Now here is the waste service chain, where currently the waste is generated, it is collected and disposed of, or it is just dumped. And we currently have quite a big informal sector, specifically in South Africa and the rest of Africa, that is actually starting to bridge this gap, to get the material from that cycle into the value chain, so that it can go to buyback centers, to the recyclers, and to end users. And some of the recyclers are local, while others are abroad, and therefore we see recycling. But this is then where the biggest opportunity probably sits, in small business development and recycling business development. And just to show you the value of the materials in Africa, we just looked at the value of organic waste, paper, glass, plastic, metals, and other that we could find values for. And my colleagues down in Stellenbosch, who are resource economics, calculated and said, if at the moment the total value of this waste, we sit at 4% recovery currently in Africa, we just recover 318,593,207 US dollars worth of material, whereas the total value that can potentially be recovered if we recovered all the material is $7 billion worth of material that is currently not entering into the economy. So therefore there's huge opportunity. Now, if we then look at the economic opportunities, poverty in Africa declined from 57% in 1919 to 43% in 2012, and it will continue on this trend so that we see actually economic growth and less poverty. People living in poverty, however, increased. Now, you may say to me, but this doesn't sound correct, because we saw a percentage decline in poverty. But remember, the population is growing. And with a growing population, even the poor people are increasing. So the number of poor people have actually increased. And we currently sit with more than 100 million people who live in absolute poverty in Africa. Now, if we just look at average incomes, in sub-Saharan Africa, the average income for a household is $2,041 US dollars. If you compare that to Europe, that stands at $27,555 US dollars in Europe. Then you can see relative poverty in Africa is a lot higher. And just for interest's sake, a family living wage in South Africa is currently equal to $813 US dollars. Now, if we then take the value of the waste that I showed you here in the previous slide, that 7 billion, can actually, if we turn that into opportunity, create a living wage at South African values for 800,000 households. Now, how's that for the potential for waste to reduce poverty in Africa? So I think you will agree with me that there's more than opportunity to actually look into what we can do with our waste to better manage it, keep it in the circular economy, move it up the waste hierarchy, and generate value out of that. The opportunities, therefore, will be poverty alleviation, but also empowerment of women, job creation, enterprise development, as well as entrepreneur development. Then you've also probably heard of the China ban. China does not want to accept plastic waste for recycling anymore. And the reason why they placed this ban is because they received too much poor quality material that they could not recycle. And they ended up then with a lot of material that couldn't be recycled that they had to manage in a different way. So the easiest way for them was to just close the border, no more imports. What has happened since? We have seen increased imports of waste through the port of Maputo, for instance, for recycling. So we are actually seeing some imports of that material now into Africa and elsewhere. And if we are not clever and take this as an opportunity and do the best that we can to actually take the opportunity, develop capacity within Africa to at least recycle our own waste in Africa, that we can generate the jobs in Africa for African people, then I think we will move forward. But if we don't take this opportunity, I can guarantee you that China will probably set up plants in Africa, employ Chinese people, and we may end up with a similar problem as China has had. Because China's main export is actually labor. They've got a shortage of labor, they export their people, and they make money in that way. And we must actually turn this ship around and make use of the opportunity for Africa. What is actually great is that we have local experts in Africa, in South Africa, very definitely. We can influence the technology choices to make sure that we don't implement technologies that failed elsewhere when we want to start recycling in South Africa or in Africa. We can innovate and customize technologies to our local conditions, and new technologies can be developed for other waste streams that currently is not recycled. And through that, we can create a lot of opportunities. So what are the conclusions then? Currently, overall, the state of waste management in Africa is poor. It's not conducive to implementing the waste hierarchy, not even to say the circular economy. But in South Africa, we are a forerunner. We are a slight step ahead of the rest of at least sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to waste management. Our policies are finding traction in the rest of Africa. The minimum requirements that was developed in South Africa is implemented in Botswana, in Swaziland, in Namibia. So we are at the forefront of waste management in Africa. I think, therefore, we must just take that opportunity and make sure that we actually implement technologies that is good for the environment and good for job creation, so that we maximize the opportunity for South Africa. The projected growth in waste and the people living in poverty in Africa requires intervention, and waste actually do provide that opportunity to assist. Opportunities locked in waste need to be realized for the benefit of Africa and its people. It doesn't help if we see these opportunities, but other people jump the gun and are ahead of us and take up those opportunities. And then implementing the hierarchy could improve the health, livelihood, and state of the environment where people live. And I think if we can start by implementing the hierarchy that's already included in our legislation, we are moving towards the circular economy, because included in the hierarchy is already recycling. There's already opportunities for waste to energy included in the hierarchy. So the two are not conflicting. The circular economy is perhaps just a step ahead of the hierarchy, a bit more sophisticated. But let's start with what's easy, what is doable. And to do this, we not only need to get the waste out of the environment, but we also need to get our households to start separating waste. If we separate out our waste, we will get cleaner recyclables to enter into the waste streams. And we must get our industries to also start separating their waste. Because if you have mono waste streams, the opportunity for industrial symbiosis is so much better. People don't want to run the risk of taking on somebody else's waste that may be highly hazardous, or something that they don't know what the implications would be for their own processes. So therefore, we want clean waste streams. The cleaner the waste stream, the more likely the opportunity will be taken up. And then opportunities provided by waste must be realized here in Africa for our people. And if we can get African technologies to work, then I think we are where we want to be. We can lead the way for the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Wow. That's all I can say. That was a very informative presentation. We start to appreciate the value of knowledge, like information and data, that then inform our activities from any initiatives that you may want to start. So thank you, Doctor, I've been watching also the tweets. I know those who are on mobile phones, they're tweeting. They're the one who are tweeting there. So I was reading most of your tweets there, reflecting on the two speakers that have gone before. So let's continue to tweet and share the knowledge and share the information with the rest of the world.